In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, Amen. O Heavenly King, the Comforter, the Spirit of truth are everywhere and fills all things. Treasure your blessings, giver of life. Come and abide in us, cleanse us from every impurity, and save our souls, O good one. The prayers of our Holy Fathers, O Jesus Christ, our God, have mercy us and save us. Amen. I have to turn my phone off. I always forget. So, we are moving rapidly towards Great Lent, and so this class is going to be on fasting. I always give these classes kind of in order: prayer, fasting, forgiveness, stewardship, because those are the four things that Christ commands us to do. He doesn't say, oh, it's a good idea. He says, when you do it like this. And of course, because we're hitting fasting starting this week, it's a good idea to give you an understanding, because I would say I get more questions about fasting than anything else. I get so many people, especially if they've never done it in their lives. And of course, we're Orthodox, so we're really weird about it. And we're hardcore, and people can exhaust themselves. And so it's always good to kind of give an overview of what we really mean by fasting. But, and then next week we will not have a class because we have church every evening. So please come to the Canon of St. Andrew. And then we'll pick up the following week. I'll probably do a class like an introduction to Great Lent, give you a nice idea of what Great Lent is. And we'll just keep moving forward. Couple of things that I would give some recommendations. There's a wonderful article in this book, The Lenten Triodium. This is like a priest's book. It has all the services for Lent. But there's an article in here by Callistos Ware called The True Nature of Fasting. You can look it up on the internet. It'll come right up. It's a really great article about what to do about fasting. The other thing I would recommend is, one of the things I always try to do is Lent. I try to always pick something to read, and that that to follow me through Lent. Whether sometimes depending on how much energy I have a real deep theological book, but usually I'm wiped out, so I try to do something that's going to help me. But I would say this book by Father Hopko, who was the priest here, The Lenten Spring. It's split up into 40 short chapters, and it helps guide you kind of like reflectively through Great Lent. We have a gazillion copies downstairs, so you're free to borrow that. So Father, he also has the Lenten Spring and the Christmas Pascha. So he does for that, yeah.
Is there significance to the iris?
No. Just fancy artwork from St. Vlad's Press. The other book, if you really want to, and we have a bunch of copies of this, is Father Alexander Schmemann, who is his father-in-law, actually, and it's called Great Lent. And Father Schmemann is the great 20th century American Orthodox theologian. And this really does a great job of helping guide you through all the things that you're going to experience during Great Lent. So, some recommended readings, like I always try to do. So, one of the things that we have to understand about Lent, about fasting rather, is that it's not meant as a punishment. It's meant as a joy. And when we are able to start stripping away things in our lives, we kind of get to the essence of who we are. And so when we fast, we don't fast, as you'll hear in Sunday's gospel reading, we don't fast as a way of punishing our body, because certainly we believe God created all things good. Our body, the material world is good, it's proper. We misuse it, but that's part of the reason we do it, the fasting, is to do that. The very first fast we have in the Bible is in the Garden of Eden. Before the fall, so think about that, before the fall, God does what? He gives a command to Adam and Eve. And what does he tell them?
Eat not of the tree of
knowledge, that's right. He says, you can eat of everything here, but this, right? And what happens? They eat it, right? So, and hence, the fall and all the other sort of things. But that important thing is to realize that the fasting was not done as a response to the fall, but the fasting was done as a way to recognize who we are before God. That God gives us a very simple commandment. We mess it up, and now we spend the rest of our generations trying to fix that. So it's important for us to realize that. Throughout the Old Testament, there are certain times in which the fast is put forth. Sometimes it's put forth as a way to celebrate. Right? There's a great victory of the Israelites, and they fast in order to give something back to God in recognition of that. And then sometimes they're told to fast when they really, really, really screwed up, and they go and they try to bring it down, and see how they're going to be. So there are all sorts of things. And certainly, as we'll get to, we talk about this in the New Testament. Christ talks a lot about fasting. Paul talks a lot about fasting. In fact, the very first book, that, if you want to call it that, after the time of Christ, the very earliest of the early Christian fathers, the Didache, which means the way, the teaching, right? The very first one, now that's 80, 90 AD, so we're talking before the Bible was put together. In that book, it talks about how to fast as Christians. So it's not like something we just sort of came up with. It's something that certainly follows us through the entire history of the Old Testament, the New Testament, the church fathers. And as the time kind of goes and the church calendar gets more and more rounded out and the fasting becomes more regulated, and it does that so that we don't make it up on our own, right? Because we'll probably screw it up anytime we try to do something on ourselves. But rather, the church gives us this way to do it as a way to assist us in that. All right, so that's the first point I want to make. The second point I want to make is that fasting is not about food. It is, but it's not. Because when we solely focus on food, we're missing the point of the fast. The food is the easiest part. Fasting with your stomach is the easy one. Right? We all do that, right? Isn't that like, what's the big thing now? Intermittent fasting, to cleanse your body, and they have all these different things. Well, we knew about this for 2,000 years. We've been doing it, right? But now it's like the big health craze, and fasting for this, and we got to do that, and you got to go to a medical procedure and you fast, and we're like, yeah, we've been doing that. So that's the easy one. Fasting, the more hard one, is fasting with your eyes and your ears and your mouth. As St. John Chrysostom says, we abstain from meat, but we devour our brothers. Right? So when you fast, it's something that we have to learn to discipline our whole body and focus our whole body. And here's the point about that. The fast isn't a special time. It's how we should be living all the time. We just increase the sort of, the intensity of it. But it's something we should be doing all the time. The third thing I'd have to say is, that fasting has to be done with joy. Has to be done with joy. It's hard, right? I'm going to tell you about the fifth week. You start to get grumpy with each other, and a seminary, we called them the purple demons, right? They all come out because we're all going to be in purple, right? And then we all start arguing with each other and getting grumpy with each other. And that's precisely why we're doing it, because now kind of the passions that are kind of you buried deep down are now coming out, and you can confront them. Yeah, I'm being a pain in the neck right now. I see myself as in not a good light. So I need to be conscious of that. And so the important thing about that is, how do you turn this idea of fasting from a obedience and a discipline to joy and liberation? Because now we're liberating ourselves from some of the very basic elemental parts of life. What do we eat? What do we drink? I mean, there are stories of saints who go years without taking a single bite of food. St. Mary of Egypt, who we'll dedicate one of the Sundays in Lent to, is one of those people. She lived on 3 loaves of bread for 20 years. How can that be? Right? In our modern way of thinking, it's impossible. But when you transcend and you have the joy of that, then it becomes something that's possible. So, so anyway, moving on. I want to give you, and just to see how the church, St. Seraphim of Sarah, his icon is right up there. You have his relic, very famous Orthodox saint. And this is how he advised his mother on how her daughter should find a husband. Right? Listen what he says. Before else, ensure that whom your daughter chooses as her companion for life keeps the fasts. If he does not, then he is not a Christian, whatever he may consider himself to be. Wow. Right? I mean, most of us are happy if we find someone who's good and nice, is going to treat our daughter with respect. But to think about that importance. And by the way, that's not unusual, because in many Orthodox countries, even to this day, when the Lent starts, you can go to a restaurant. You're not going to find meat in the restaurant. It's just part of the culture. It's just part of the way of living, right? Now, like in Moscow, it's a very modern city, or, all these other places. But that was how important, because everyone did it. You didn't have to think about it. You just did it. And that's the key. The more you think about fasting, the more you're doing it wrong. It has to become just a habit. So, in this Sunday, we're going to hear this. This is how we start Lent. So listen to the reading that the church tells us as we start to fast for Great Lent. And this is the reading that they prescribe for us. It's in Matthew 6. When you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces to show others they are fasting. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face, so that it will not be obvious to others that you are fasting, but only to your Father who is unseen. And your Father here, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. Now that seems weird to us. Why would I put oil on my face? But to make it look lively, right? I mean, oil in the ancient world was like the aspirin. It was like everything. And so when you put it, it means you're glowing, right? You're not sitting there looking sallow and miserable, but you're actually looking like joyful, and you're doing it in secret. So I am not the food Nazis. I don't come looking into people's windows and seeing if they're fasting or not, right? It's up to you on how you do it. The church gives us this rule, a rule that's based on monasticism. And then it's up to us to see how we can follow each of those rules during this time. That's the freedom that it gives to us. And we're going to hear more about that at the end. So anyway, so what do we learn? First, you fast, right? Christ says right there, when you fast. Not if you fast, when you fast. The second thing, be joyful, right? It's telling you to be joyful. And third, do it in secret. Don't talk about it. We had this nun, Mother Gabriella. She's the abbess of the Romanian monastery up in Michigan. And we had a room full of priests. There must have been 50 or 60 priests. And she was give us a talk. And the first thing she did, she looked at all the priests and said, "Stop talking about food." All right? That's all you priests do, is you talk about food during Lent. And that's going to lead you astray. And she told us the story that when she was a young nun, and her spiritual father in Romania had given her permission to travel to America about starting a monastery, etc. And he said, "You can go anywhere you go. Go do anything you're going to do while you're there." Obviously, she's a nun. But make sure you fast, because that will sharpen your life, sharpen your senses, sharpen what you're trying to do. Right? We all know that, right? In my family, we call it anaconda mode. Like you eat so much and you just want to lay on the couch and digest. The anaconda just ate the capybara and is digesting it. It takes a while, right? So fasting should allow us to be more sharp, right? However, when you get hangry, right, and you're hungry and you're angry, that is giving you the opposite. So how do you learn to control that? By building yourself up. None of you here can run a marathon. Well, I don't know that for a fact, but I'm pretty sure none of you here could go out and run a marathon. My son can, but none of you can. And when you're running, you can't just go, you got to train for it, right? You got to build up. Well, Lent is a marathon. Fasting is a marathon. So you got to train your body for that. And every year you try to do a little bit more, a little bit more, and a little bit more. And so I always get these new Orthodox, and they're going to try to do the full monastic fast, and by week 4 they're passing out in church, because they haven't learned how to do it and how to build themselves up for it. So just remember that. Romans 14. Romans are always good because it always is a way of yelling at us. Except that one whose faith is weak without quarreling over disreputable matters. One person's faith allows them to eat anything, but another whose faith is weak eats only vegetables. And the one who eats everything must not treat with contempt the one who does not. And the one who does not eat everything must not judge the one who does, for God has accepted them. Who are you to judge someone else what someone else does? Their own master, servants stand or fall. They will stand, for the Lord is able to make them stand. For a person considers one day more sacred than another considers every day alike. So what he's saying, the Apostle Paul, is don't judge. Don't judge. I remember I was in Jerusalem and I was eating at a family's house that their son was in seminary, and they were Orthodox, Palestinian Orthodox, and their kitchen overlooked the patriarch's kitchen. And the old lady goes, he eats meat during Lent. Like, I don't want to know any of that. Anyway, so the idea is this. Fasting is intensely personal, and it should liberate us from our passions. That's the whole point. I remember there was an Orthodox theologian who wrote a pamphlet. I have it somewhere in my office. Lent as liberation. And that's the whole point, right? It's a way in which we learn self-discipline and self-control. It's a way that it gives us this idea that we're doing is trying to liberate ourselves from all the things, like thinking about what I'm going to eat tomorrow and making a big fancy menu and all that stuff. We'll do that for Pascha and all that stuff. But you think about all that stuff, and then your focus is no longer on the season. And by the way, and John Chrysostom he writes a lot about fasting. He's very clear about this. Fasting should be always, always, always accompanied by prayer and almsgiving. So in other words, why do we have all these extra services during Lent? Because that's part of it, right? The extra prayers. But the almsgiving, and he actually says the money you save in fasting should be put aside and given to the poor. Well, you're going to hear more about that. But anyway, so it's a very important thing. He also says give up one meal a day and take that money and put it aside and give it to the poor, which is what I tell people who are vegetarians, because now we have people who are vegetarians. Well, what do I do during the fast? Well, give up a meal or eat smaller portions. It's a medicine, as John Chrysostom talks, to heal what spiritually ails us. We have to know how and when to use it, and so it does good and not harm. So, whatever you decide, and I suggest you talk to me privately about that, what you plan on trying to do, especially if it's your first time, just be judicious and make sure that you are thinking it through and grow into it. So another quote from John Chrysostom. Well, it's a long quote. But it's a good quote. I'll read it, because it's good. So fasting is the change of every part of our life, because the sacrifice of the fast is not the abstinence, but the distancing from sins. Therefore, whoever limits the fast to deprivation of food, he is the one who in reality abhors and ridicules the fast. Are you fasting? Show me your fast with your works. Which works? If you see someone who's poor, show mercy. If you see an enemy, reconcile with him. If you see a friend who's becoming successful, do not be jealous of him. If you see a beautiful woman in the street, pass her by. In other words, not only should the mouth fast, but the eyes and the legs and the arms and all the other parts of the body should fast as well. Let the hands fast, remaining clean from stealing and greediness. Let the legs fast, avoiding roads which lead to sinful sights. Let the eyes fast by not fixing themselves on beautiful faces and by not observing the beauty of others. You are not eating meat, are you? You should not eat debauchery with your eyes as well. And let your hearing also fast. The fast of hearing is not to accept bad talk against others and sly defamation. Now think about this when he's writing this. This is in Constantinople, 4th century. 4th century. Perfect. I remember I was a priest in Vegas. This was hard. Let the mouth fast from disgraceful and abusive words. Because what gain is there when, on the one hand, we avoid eating chicken and fish, on the other hand, we chew up and consume our brothers? He who condemns and blasphemes is as if he has eaten brotherly meat, as if he had bitten into the flesh of his fellow man. He's dramatic. It is because of this that Paul frightened us, saying, if you chew up and consume one another, be careful that you do not annihilate yourselves. And then my favorite line, we fast from meat but devour our brothers. Or, if we cannot control what goes in our mouth, how are we going to control what comes out of our mouth? So that's an important thing. So fast with all of that, right? Fast with all those things. So in summary, what it is a way to regain control over our bodies, simplify our lives, lighten our load, so we can pray, discipline, abstinence, purity, all the good things that we are supposed to be as Christians. And so again, that's why I argue this is not a special time of the year, but the way we should be living all the time of the year. So, but we can also go a little crazy. The Russian writer Chekhov? Yeah. His father was a deacon in the church. He was very much raised in the Orthodox church, so he had this great knowledge. If you ever read this short story called The Murder. So it's about two brothers. And the two brothers don't like their local priest. Probably drinks a little bit too much, smells like tobacco, doesn't do the services correctly, etc., etc., etc. So they decide they're going to start their own church and they're going to do the services exactly the way that they're supposed to be. Right? Because that priest doesn't know what he's doing. We know what we're doing. And we're going to fast really strictly and all that other stuff. Well, it ends up one brother kills the other brother because the brother had oil on a Wednesday. He had broken the fast. Completely, so totally Pharisaic on it. And so you have to be cautious about that, right? Anyway. So, any questions before I get to the next part? That was all background. In 24 minutes. Okay, so a couple things. So what exactly is fasting? We always hear this one, especially people in the West. It's interesting because the Roman Church had the exact same rules as we did. And yet over time it's kind of lessened and lessened. Now it's what, Wednesdays and Fridays during Lent? But if that, not even that. Now it's
you're expected to fast from meat, but not all animal products. It's just
right.
You sell fish.
Yeah. So anyway, those things change. How many Orthodox bishops does it take to change a light bulb? Change? Anyway. So, that's it, so what are you giving up for Lent? Oh, I'm giving up chocolate, or I'm giving up TV. And those are all fine and good, right? And they are, and you should. I remember my wife would tell a story when her and her sister were little, and her dad's a priest, and they decided they were going to really do Lent, and they were not going to have TV for the entire Lent. They totally gave up TV, and they said it was hard. They did a lot of puzzles. She still does puzzles during Lent, but I don't know. It's kind of hard, but you got to simplify those things. So remember that, as I alluded to, the fasting rules that we have in effect now are based on monastic rules. Monks and nuns are vegetarians. All right? When you become a monk or a nun, you don't eat meat. All right? They eat what's called xerophagi, dry eating. Or wet eating. They'll broil, vegetables that are boiled and, that type of thing. So when you see on the calendar, oh, you can have fish, that's like a big day for them. Right? Woohoo, we can have fish. The other one that you'll notice is you'll say olive oil and wine. Well, those are considered luxuries. Now, the Eucharistic wine doesn't count, obviously. But olive oil was considered a luxury. Right? So they would give up olive oil for Lent and wine for Lent. But there are certain days when that would be lightened, like Annunciation. So when we meet, so basically fasting means meat. And so that means beef, lamb, chicken, poultry, lard, broth, any of the animal products we have. Fish is not considered meat. Okay? So basically it means no meat. No meat, right from my big fat Greek wedding, I make you lamb. So dairy is another part of that. And in strictness, dairy is given up as well. And that means eggs and milk and cheese and all that stuff, right? We do first week and last week, no dairy. But when the kids were little, you got to feed them if you can feed them. So all those things, meat and dairy, is all the stuff that you'll see show up in the Pascha baskets and everyone at 2:30 in the morning is eating all this stuff after the service because they haven't eaten it for all this time. So olive oil, we talked about wine. So fish with a backbone. Yeah, go ahead, Daniel.
Dairy and eggs, you said, right?
Yeah, eggs are considered dairy in the church.
Okay.
Even though it's from a chicken.
Does that include anything that has that ingredient?
Yes. Yeah, which makes it really hard.
What about caviar?
Caviar is allowed. We used to love to try to bother our professors. Well, what about crocodile or alligator? Or turtle, right? Or frog's legs.
How about honey?
Honey is always allowed.
It is or isn't?
Is.
Okay.
Yeah. So don't get sophistry like that. So anyway, so we have in the church, we have this differentiation between fish with a backbone and fish without a backbone. That sounds really, really bizarre, right? So what's fish with a backbone?
Tuna, salmon.
Yeah, any normal fish that you go, and fish without a backbone is lobster, shrimp, scallops, mussels, oysters. That is always allowed during Lent. You can have all of that stuff because why? In the early church, that was junk food. That was stuff you could walk along the beach and just sort of pick it up. Whereas fish, you had to actually work for. Isn't that? Yeah, so think like monks. I know we don't want to, but think like monks. They were trying to limit the amount of work that they were doing for their meals. All right? So when you see fish with a backbone, oh, that's great. Oh, we have a luxury. And they do make really good fish sometimes. But you can have lobster anytime. One professor used to say, it'd be equivalent of us saying, like today saying, oh, just have a hot dog, which I don't even think has meat in it anyway. But, because it's like kind of your easy thing that you can make and you don't think much about it, right? Not saying.
Your breakfast is going to get really difficult here.
Why?
So, bagel but no butter.
What?
Cereal but no milk. Bagel but no butter.
You can have
Eggs,
oatmeal.
no eggs. Oatmeal but with no
Yeah.
milk.
Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. By the way, now you have almond milk. Like, I don't know how they milk an almond, but they have all different. You'll see for coffee, I will have all those different things. Yeah.
When they say nut milks, they just mean they take the nuts, grind it into an emulsion powder, and then dilute it with water.
That's how they make milk?
Pretty much most of your almond coconut milks is just a thing ground up and diluted into a gel.
Oh, lovely.
Like jello, man, of course it goes. Wouldn't think of it. But it's
Yeah. So it ends up peanut butter. My wife eats a lot of peanut butter during that. Peanut butter was created for the Orthodox. We do a lot of meatless spaghetti, and you end up doing a lot of carbs. And then all of a sudden you're supposed to be cutting, and I gained weight during Lent, right? Because what did they do? They ate potatoes and spaghetti and, all this sort of stuff. So, there are so many Lenten cookbooks. We have some downstairs. There's so many of them now that there's all sorts of things you can do. You'll find out when you come to Friday through Sanctified, because everyone brings something in. And I always do hulushki, noodles and cabbage, which I love, but my wife can't stand. So anyway, so to keep the strictness of the fast, it's no meat, no dairy. If you guys can do that, I would be amazed, and I would say don't. Right? Don't. Just try to keep it and do what you're capable of doing. And we're going to talk about the fasting days and the fasting season so we get an idea. If you can build up over time to do that, great. But take your time. Right? I don't know. Anybody here a vegetarian? No. So I don't have to worry about that. You're a vegetarian?
No, I'm just asking.
No, you're not, Daniel. I've seen you eat.
Definitely not. My question is, does the Orthodox Church believe in abstaining from water and food? Like, do they do those fasts?
We're going to talk about that in a second. All right. Put it on hold. So, also important is the number of meals you eat, the size of the meals, the way it's prepared. And some people have become very Pharisaic about it. I mean, I remember people going into stores and looking at the label. Oh, this has whey. Whey is a dairy product, therefore I can't. And they would become so ridiculous about it that they're missing the whole point. Right? But again, thankfully today we have so many, you go to a store now, they have whole sections that are vegetarian. And you can get bacon, it tastes like bacon, but I always say that's not really, it's maybe the letter of the law, but is it the spirit of the law, right? So you just got to be careful in those things. So don't get Pharisaic about it, all right? Just do the best you can. And by the way, say you're in a household and your spouse or your mom or whatever doesn't fast, you eat what's put in front of you. You don't make a big deal. Every year when I lived in Montana, I had parishioners who lived way out on a ranch that was about a 5-hour drive from Billings. And they had been there on that ranch since 1880. Now, Little Bighorn was 1876. This is wild land. They were a Ukrainian family that had settled out there. And I would go out to visit them, and it would be a fast day, and they served me this, it was a cattle ranch, beautiful steaks. Guess what I did? You eat the steak. You don't make a big deal. Like, you don't say, oh, no, I'm fasting. Is my mom on? Because I'll tell a story about her, and she'll yell at me later. When I was starting to get very serious about fasting, I remember one Christmas, she had a party, and, people are eating all this sort of stuff, and I'm very quietly just not eating the meat. My mom's going around saying, oh, he's going to be a priest. He can't eat meat. I'm like, shh, don't tell anybody.
Yes.
So anyway, you do it in secret, right? And you don't make it a big thing. And you don't make it into a fight between, your mom and you or whatever. You eat what's put in front of you. That's the hospitality that's offered to you. You are exempted from fasting for 3 reasons. 1, if you have to take medication with food, certain types of food sometimes, you take your medication. Like people won't eat, we'll talk about this about before communion. You're supposed to not eat or drink anything from midnight to the time you receive communion. If you have to take medication with food, you take medication and you take your food with it. Just makes sense. The second thing, and this is the one we love to use. We use this one and we try to, if you're traveling. If you're traveling, now, how do you define traveling? Because I'm driving down the road or I'm going to a foreign country, right? There's many debates about that. But if you're traveling and in all good honesty, you can't find something that's a fasting meal, you eat whatever's there. So, but again, don't get too loose about that, shall we say. And then finally, like I talked about, you don't embarrass your host. If someone feeds you something, you eat it. Okay? So that's it. So if you add all the fasting days in the Orthodox Church, you come to about, give or take, 180 days. So about 180 days out of the year, depending on when Easter is. This year's definitely long. No, it's shorter this year. I'll explain why. So 180 days, you should be fasting. So normally, and this is the one I would recommend you try during Lent, Wednesdays and Fridays. Right? Just learn to do it. Don't even think about it. Right? Why Wednesdays and Fridays? Anybody have an idea? It's right in the Didache, by the way. Wednesday was the day of betrayal, and Friday was the day of crucifixion. Right? So it's a way of kind of remembering that. So just get into that habit right now. Wednesdays and Fridays. Don't think about it. Don't talk about it. You just do it. And if you screw up, and you start over again. All right? Again, Father Eric's not going to be looking in and seeing what you're eating. As I talked about, when you become Orthodox, you're receiving communion. From midnight to the time you receive communion, you shouldn't eat or drink. Right? So the first thing that goes on your stomach is the communion. Now, when we were teenagers and stuff, we'd have like big church get-togethers, and we'd all be looking at the clock and shoving food before we got to the stroke of midnight, you know. Well, now we got to stop. By the way, you can brush your teeth in the morning. People get all paranoid. What happens if I swallow something? You're fine. Please, for my sake. Brush your teeth. But go ahead, wash, you do it. Be normal. Just be normal. Again, if we have evening, like pre-sanctified liturgies, we have on Fridays at 6:30 in the evening, or at certain times of the year, we have late services. Go to noon, eat up at noon, and noon to when you receive communion. You fast. All right? So pre-sanctified, I'm at this point, I have medication I have to take and all that stuff, and if I don't have something in the morning, I'll get goofy.
We'll notice.
You never notice, right? But, so for evening liturgies, I'll have a breakfast. And again, just do it. So there are 4 extended fasting periods in the church, right? These are periods of time. So the first one is Great Lent, right? We're starting Great Lent on Sunday, and it goes all the way, technically, to Palm Sunday. And then the Holy Week is outside of Great Lent, but it's stricter. So it's about 40 days, that whole period. So that is your great fast. That's the time of doing the fast. The other big extended period is what in the West they call Advent, we call the Nativity Fast. So that goes from November 15th to December 24th. Right? Again, about 40 days. Right? And there are 2 other fasting periods. The Dormition Fast, which goes from August 1st to August 15th, because that Dormition is the celebration of the death of Mary. Right, so we have that, which is, of course, my birthday is right in the middle of that, which is why I always get lobster. My birthday. So we have that. And then the other one is the Apostles' Fast. And I've never had a really good explanation. The Apostle Fast is a movable one. This year, because Easter is late, you have it's from, I can tell you exactly. It's the Monday after the Feast of All Saints, all the way up to the Feast of St. Peter and Paul, which is on June 29th. So like this year, we have a late Easter. We have no Apostles' Fast. It's a negative fast, actually. However, if Easter is very early, you can have a 40-day fast period. Usually it's about a week to 2 weeks, depending. But this year we luck out. We don't have one. So those are your four major fasting periods. And I also recommend that during those four major fasting periods is when you should definitely come to confession as a way to kind of keep that cycle going. So those are the four. So then we have, you'll see, every now and then you'll see strict fast day. This is going to answer your question. There are a couple days of the year which is called a strict fast day. What are those days? This is going to surprise you. Christmas Eve is considered a strict fast day. Eve of Theophany, January 5th. The beheading of St. John the Baptist, August 29th. The Feast of the Elevation of the Cross, September 14th. What does a strict fast day mean? Between, if you can, between sunrise and sunset, you should eat very minimally, if anything. That's hard to do, right? So I just say eat as little as possible during that period. All of those are part of this idea of really focusing on what we are celebrating. We're celebrating the birth of Christ. And Christmas Eve is when everyone goes to big parties, right? Not so much in the Orthodox world. It should be a church. And we have all special traditions about different foods you eat there, especially if you're Carpatho Russian. You eat garlic and all sorts of, the 12 dishes and all that sort of thing. Then you have, the Feast of the Baptism of Christ. You're recognizing that. The Feast of the Elevation of the Cross, when the true cross was found. The beheading of John the Baptist. Even there's traditions that you shouldn't serve anything on a plate that has to be cut with a knife that's round. Like the watermelon on the platter, the knife is bad. They're little kind of little village customs, shall we say. But there's one day of the year in which I would say, this is the strict fast day. It's so strict of a fast day that it's the only day in the church year that you can't receive communion. And that is Holy Friday, Good Friday, when Christ is hanging on the cross. That's the only day there is no Eucharistic service. And that's how strict we take it. Right? Because how can you, with Christ hanging on the cross? Of course, the next morning we have a beautiful service, which will be your chrismation, and with the 15 Old Testament readings and all that sort of stuff. So, but anyway, so that's what so if you see strict fast day, that's what it means. Eat minimally that day. But the church is kind and merciful and loving to us all. Because with these fasting days comes fast-free days where you can eat everything you want. Go to town, right? So not ironically, by design actually, the Sunday after the publican, the week after the publican and the Pharisee, we just celebrated that a couple of weeks ago, right? When we're told not to be Pharisees, the church says, have a fast-free week. Go out. We always joke, my wife and I, not only can we have a bacon cheeseburger on Fast-Free Friday, we must have a bacon cheeseburger on Fast-Free Friday.
It must be done.
So it must be done, right? So the church gives us that sort of gift, in a way, for us to recognize that we're not going to be Pharisees about this. The week after Pascha, from Pascha night, fast-free for, all the way Bright Week, and some places all the way until Pentecost. Ascension, 40 days. We just did 40 days of fasting. The church did 40 days of go to town, eat the flesh meats, as the prayer says. I like that word, flesh meats. The flesh meats. From Christmas Day to the evening of Theophany, go to town, eat whatever you want. The week after Pentecost, called Trinity Week, eat whatever you want. So, and in fact, the church, when we have the Pascha service, from the time of the Pascha service to the time of the Feast of Pentecost, which is 50 days, we're not supposed to get on our knees. Like you'll notice, like when I do the liturgy and I consecrate the gifts, I bow down and go on my knees. During that time, I'll just bow down because we're lifted up. The church is telling us, don't get on your knees. And of course, Pentecost, we have the Pentecost kneeling prayers, which are killing my knees now. These 3 long prayers that we do, which is the first time we get back on our knees. So, and you can see, right? And then you'll see on Easter, on Pascha night, downstairs will be filled with all these baskets of food. Ham, kibasi, lamb. My parishioners in Vegas used to roast the lamb while we were doing the Pascha service. It smelled so good. Cheeses and dairies and vodka. Oh, did I say that? And all sorts of different things. And I come down and I bless all the baskets. And then everyone sits and we all share this meal and we share each other's food. And we eat all the food that we haven't eaten for all this time. However, I would warn you, be careful, right? If you haven't done this for a while, then you start eating this, you can start timing people running off to the bathroom. Because your body's not used to it again. So just take it easy. Take it easy. So again, oh, good. So if you are a vegetarian, this is for out there, no one here is a vegetarian, but we had a number of people in the parish. Again, my recommendation is eat right, eat light, smaller portions, give up a meal, and follow a rule for other parts of your life about giving things up. So it's an important part of that. So I've been mentioning a lot about Easter, right? So, before we go into my conclusions, anybody have any questions? Yeah.
Where does alcohol fall into this?
Where does alcohol fall into it?
I know, we're supposed to allow communion, but do you just not?
We're Orthodox, we drink. No, but you should. I mean, obviously you drink in moderation. And during the fasting periods, you should. I mean, if you have a beer, that's okay, but don't go out to the bars and, go crazy during Lent. You shouldn't be going to there. And again, in these Orthodox countries, they shut down all the theaters, they would shut down all the pubs and all the other things. So, the whole point is to live that moderate life. But can you have a beer or a shot of vodka or a glass of wine? Absolutely. Yep. We're good on that. We're Orthodox, we're not Baptists. Other questions? Yeah, Daniel.
I have a hypothetical question.
Oh, great.
Let's say that you are let's say you go to a party just with a friend, a couple of friends.
Right.
Obviously, you might drink a few beers and might be at your head and whatnot. But let's say that. Let's say somebody else orders a plate of food, and like you said,
you eat what's in front of you. I mean, if you have control over it. I mean, you're with other people. It's not like you're at someone's house at their table.
Yeah.
You're at a bar.
Yeah.
Right? Which you shouldn't be anyway during Lent. But go ahead.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
You can avoid it.
Yeah,
you can avoid it. So the whole point is what you can control, you can control. The difference between that and what's hospitality when someone comes and puts something before you. The worst thing I've ever eaten, the single worst thing I have ever, and I eat everything, and I've eaten a lot of weird things, was at that same meal in Jerusalem. And they were so excited to have me there, they were going to have a special meal for me. And they brought out a slimy, slippery plate of boiled sheep's tongues with all the cartilage underneath it and stuff. It was a great delicacy. And it smelled horrid. And they're making a big fuss that they made me these sheep tongues, and I had to eat it. And I'm like, but I did. The second was when we had dinner with the Patriarch of Moscow, and they brought out lampreys. You know what a lamprey is? It's not. It's worse than an eel.
Yeah.
It's a parasite, like long thing that sucks on the. And in Russia, that's a great delicacy to have lamprey. But they don't just fillet the lamprey, though. They chop it. So you've got the whole cross section of it, and it's like. So anyway, other question. So I want you to, we were talking about Pascha, and the tradition on Pascha night is I don't do a sermon. We let John Chrysostom do the sermon. And it's been going on since 4th, 5th century, and every Orthodox church in the world on that night reads the same sermon. I'm not going to give you the whole one, but it's an incredible one. But I want you to listen to what John Chrysostom says on Easter night before we go downstairs and break the fast. This is the first part. If any man be devout and love God, let him enjoy this fair and radiant triumphal feast. And if any man be a wise servant, let him rejoice in entering into the joy of his Lord. And if any have labored long in fasting, let him now receive his recompense. And if any have wrought from the first hour, let him today receive his just reward. He's talking about fasting. If any have come at the third hour, let him with thankfulness keep the feast. And if any has arrived at the 6th hour, let him have no misgivings, because he shall in no way be deprived. And if anyone is deprived and delayed until the 9th hour, let him draw near, fearing nothing. If any tarried even to the 11th hour, let him also not be alarmed at his tardiness. For the Lord, who is jealous of his honor, will accept the last even as the first. He gives rest unto him who came at the 11th hour, even as unto him who worked from the first hour. He shows mercy upon the last and cares for the first. And to one he gives, and to another he bestows a gift. And he both accepts the deeds, welcomes the intention, honors the act, and praises the offer. That is how we should think about fasting. Right? John Chrysostom said, even if you didn't start fasting until that last moment, you're still welcome at the Christ's resurrection. Right? All of us are welcome there, because that's the whole point of everything. And so when you start to think about this idea of fasting and what it is in the church, and don't get overwhelmed with the rules and all the other sort of things, they will come over time. In fact, St. Innocent, right over there, of Moscow, when he does his instruction to missionaries, when he was a missionary up in Alaska in the 1840s, and he told the clergy, instructed them, don't talk about fasting until the end. Right? Don't talk about that. Talk about Christ and the fall and why we need a Savior and all those things. Fasting, they'll learn. Of course, what do they live on up there in the islands in Alaska? Fish. Right? So, and, well, not really. They have other stuff. Seal flipper, not the best either. But the whole point being is that this is a gift that's given to us. It's a discipline that we develop. It shouldn't be seen as something that's oppressing us, but rather is liberating us from our own body and from our own passions. And it's a way that we honor God. And so when we do it, we should do it with great joy, as the gospel reading says. Doesn't mean it's not going to be hard. If it's not hard, it's not worth doing, right? So it's going to be hard. And sometimes it's going to really stink. And there's going to be days you're going to come home like, what am I going to eat? Nothing appeals to me. Good. Now you're getting into the idea. Now you're starting to confront this type of stuff. Now you're starting to learn to control your own body. And that's the whole point of it. Okay? But the whole point is not to just follow some set of laws, but to engrave them on your heart and to flee to it. So, questions. Anybody? You're all blown away. I have a question here from Freddie. Okay. Are children excluded from fasting? If not, how would you explain to them? My recommendation is you grow the children in fasting. You grow them in it. Wednesdays and Fridays should just become an automatic, right? That's an easy one, right? Because we're supposed to do that anyway, right? It's healthy not to eat red meat every day. But with the children, you kind of grow them into it. I would have to, even our kids, we didn't keep it that strict with them when they were growing up, particularly the dairy and all the other stuff. So don't become parasitic about it, but you teach them to want to do it. And then it becomes just a habit. You don't think about it. That's the whole point. The second question Freddie asks is, how important is prayer during fasting? Absolutely 100%. I talked about that earlier. Prayer and fasting have to go together. It has to go together. That's why we have not only the extra ones, but and Christ even says that this demon can only be cast out by prayer and fasting. They have to be connected together. So you'll see, like we'll do on Sunday during the Vespers, we'll do St. Ephraim's prayer for the first time, which we'll do throughout Great Lent. This beautiful, incredible prayer. We'll see all the extra prayers, but you can't do it and just do it. It has to be accompanied by your own personal prayer life. And that will give you the strength to it, the strength to be able to do it. So remember, there are those four things. We talked about prayer, fasting, almsgiving. We're going to hear all three of those in Sunday's gospel reading and in my sermon. Got a preview. And then forgiveness. Those are the four things that Christ says, when you do it like this. So they should always be in concert with each other. Okay? Does that answer your question, Freddie? I'm sure it does. I turned down the thing so I couldn't hear you. There we go. All right. Other questions? Wonderful. Yeah.
Okay, I have a basic question.
That's why we're here. It's Orthodoxy 101.
So, why is the Lenten season in the Orthodox Church different from the Western Church?
That's a great question. Why are we off? All right, you want the simple answer or the long answer?
Whatever you feel like getting.
Okay. So, basically put, there are two calendars at work here.
Right.
One is called the Julian calendar, and one is called the Gregorian calendar. So the Julian calendar is that's the lunar-based calendar. The Gregorian calendar is a solar-based calendar. So for most of history, the entire world was on the Julian calendar until the 19th century when Pope Gregory reintroduced a new calendar, which, by the way, is much more accurate, and that was introduced and most of the world started to adopt that, right? In the United States, during the American Revolution, we were all on the Julian calendar, right? And it's 13 days difference between the two calendars. And every so many hundreds of years, another day is going to get added, and, it just gets out of kilter. So, in the Orthodox Church, since all these things were established, they were established on the Julian calendar, right? So, like when you hear something like, Russian Christmas, January 7th, it's not. It's December 25th. But it's December 25th on the Julian calendar.
Right.
But if you calculate it, it's January 7th on the Gregorian calendar.
Okay.
Right? So you with me so far?
Yeah.
Okay. So, with that being said, there was, in the 19th century, there was a meeting of all the Orthodox to say, what do we do now? The rest of the Julian calendar doesn't work for everybody. In some places, the Gregorian calendar works. So they came up with what was called the revised Julian calendar. I'm getting to the answer. I'm just giving you. Okay. We argue more about calendars in the Orthodox Church than anything else. And as long as we're arguing about calendars, we're in good shape. Okay? Because we're not arguing about the divinity of Christ or any of that stuff. So what they did is they decided that some churches decided to go on this modified calendar, which they would do all the fixed feast days would be on the Gregorian calendar, but all the Easter, the feast that, because Easter moves, and we'll get to that in a second, will be on the Julian calendar. So some countries, and some even in America, some jurisdictions adopted the modified calendar, and some kept on the Julian calendar. When I was a kid, it was all Julian calendar. In 1970, we moved to the modified calendar. All right, so first you got to get that set up. All right, so some again have remained on, but the idea was that all Orthodox will celebrate Easter on the same day. Okay, so whatever calendar you're on, we're all on the Julian calendar for Easter, except for one, Finland. Because Finland is a state-sponsored church, and by law, they all have to be together. So don't get into that. So how do we determine the date of Christmas? This is from the First Ecumenical Council in 325, the date of Easter, Christmas as well. And so it was decided that, because there was all people who were celebrating at different times, and so this kind of set the time. It is the first Sunday after the first full moon after the spring equinox. Specifically, it says not to use the Jewish Passover, even though we kind of do, because that's how they determine it. So this idea of the first Sunday after the first full moon after the spring equinox, which is when the earth is most bathed in light. So here's the point. When you determine the equinox, depends on your calendar. I mean, you could see the equinox, but when that first full moon is, depends on the calendar.
Oh, right, yeah.
Right, so that's why. So sometimes, like I think next year, the two Easters are together.
Okay.
Usually they're about a week apart. This is one of those unusual years where they're like 40 days apart, right? We're just starting that, and you guys, and the West is getting ready to celebrate Easter. So it's just basically about that observable moment in which, and then how do you apply it to the calendar? So you actually have something called the Paschal moon. So you can actually look up after the equinox and look for that first full moon, and there is something very different about that moon. It's like very bright, very large, very observable. But then, again, the calendar kind of... So that's what it is. So that means we get usually cheap chocolate for the Easter baskets. This year there won't be any chocolate left. Or we get, other sort of things. When I was a kid, we had two Christmases. We had American Christmas and Russian Christmas. Right? So we got two Christmases. But, and people get very passionate about this. So if you go on websites and you start put up the Orthodox calendar, you will get like, oh my God, people will go to die over which calendar to be on. Don't worry about it. This is what we have. This is what the Orthodox Church in America and most jurisdictions in the United States adopted. So, and there are people here, like when I was in Las Vegas, I had a huge Russian community. And so I would have a Christmas service, because that's all they ever care. They never care about any other holidays. I would have a Christmas service in Slavonic for the Russian people. I'd bring a priest there because my Slavonic is horrid. But we would do something for them because that was important to them. Here, this parish was established. It was established to be the new calendar or the revised calendar, all English. We don't have that issue here. But so again, don't worry about the polemics that you may find. I have to warn you.
Yeah, no, this board is curious.
Yes. So again, we Orthodox will fight more about the calendar than anything else. And that brings me great comfort. So, does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. And the reality is that the two calendars are going to eventually get farther and farther apart. At one point, then it's going to be not 13 days, but 14 days. Then what's going to happen? Then we're going to have the new old calendarists, and then the old calendarists, and then,
Old V1, old V2.
Yeah. Just let it go. Other questions? Great question. Yeah.
So I was looking at the prayer book. There's like a lunch and a dinner prayer. I didn't see a morning one. Is there a recommended one for a morning meal or?
I recommend you do the Our Father, right? That's the prayer that we as Orthodox do before every meal. And, there are other little prayers in there.
Like before the evening and afternoon.
They're all
or
good.
after.
Are you actually, I hope and pray that you can get together at least one time a day when you're going to eat together and do the Our Father before you eat. That most of the time, my wife leaves at 5:30 in the morning, so I eat breakfast by myself. She's doing her thing, I'm doing dinner. We're at least together, theoretically, last few nights it hasn't been, but that you could pray together, and just do the Our Father. That's what Christ tells us how to pray. It covers everything. That's what we do when we pray here for meals. Good question. Other questions? Boy, you guys are easy. I think that's it. I don't think I have any other questions. None on the site, so we are good. So let's pray. Look at that, 8:05. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, amen. It is truly meet to bless you, Theotokos, ever blessed and most pure, and the Mother of our God, more honorable than the cherubim, more glorious beyond compare than the seraphim. Without corruption, you gave birth to God, the Word, true Theotokos. We magnify you. Through the prayers of the Holy Fathers of Jesus Christ, our God, have mercy and save us. Amen. And the other thing, I would listen very carefully to the verses that we'll be singing this weekend and this following week. Listen very, very carefully to the words that the Church has adopted for us in order to say during this time of Lent. Have a blessed evening.